Welcome. It's nice to have you be part of our conversation. Today, my partner is Jane Spencer, and she has a great story about coming to Vermont. And I share a similar kind of story. We both, because we came to Vermont, and are Vermonters by choice, right?
Yes, it turns out that did become a Vermonter by choice. I came here many years ago when I looked for something to do, basically a summer job when I was in college. And I looked at that time at the mobile travel guide,
Mm-hmm.
and I looked for a resort that had lots of stars because I was looking to make lots of tips. And lo and behold, there was a Basin Harbor Club in
Hmm.
Ferrisburg, Vermont. So I, with a roommate, flew up to Boston and then flew in this little tiny plane where there were probably only 8 of us
Mm-hmm.
and not a whole lot of pressure control in the cockpit. And met up with somebody who picked me up and fell in love with Vermont. Honestly, Basin Harbor Club was just a fun place to be. First of all, I don't know if you've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful on this lovely little harbor, and multicolored Adirondack chairs all
Mm-hmm.
around, and lots of college students who were there for the summer to do exactly what I was doing, which was waiting tables.
Mm-hmm.
And, that meant getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and being in the dining room by 5:30, and maybe serving a buffet lunch too, and then definitely serving dinner. So it was long hours,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in a very formal dining room, and we wore green uniforms with white aprons that matched the upholstery in the dining room. And your station that you got had to do with how long you've been there. So I was a new waitress, so I didn't get the best station. And then you got assigned to tables where guests would come for a week or they'd come for a couple of weeks. Sometimes they came for a whole month. I don't know if any of them actually came for the whole summer. And they were always greeted by the owners, who were the Beaches, who were very congenial and met people at the door. And then they would be seated, and we would serve a formal dinner. Women had to wear skirts,
Mm-hmm.
and men had to wear ties. And there is a story from way back when that Lucille Ball, once upon a time, arrived at Basin Harbor Club, tried to get into the dining room, but had on pedal pushers, and they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't let her in.
Oh,
So whether that's true, or whether that's one of those kind
a
of
high
urban
class
legend,
place.
it's what?
A high class
Yeah,
place.
apparently. I'm not sure how that works now, whether it's quite as formal, but I know that they've made a
Mm-hmm.
lot of changes and are, a lot more family oriented than they were at that time. It tended to be couples who came,
Mm-hmm.
professionals
Mm-hmm.
from Boston area, New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a fun time. When we finished for the night, we would party,
Mm.
and that's how I met my husband. Actually, he was a dairy farmer
Mm-hmm.
who, with a group of other young men, would come to see who was working at the Basin Harbor
Mm-hmm.
that summer. So that's how I got to know him. And honestly, I have to say, yeah, that was my introduction to work in Vermont. But I also fell in love with the dairy farm, with the whole sort of ambiance of that. And I can remember he actually is from Addison. We actually live right now on what was part of the dairy farm, and that's what he did, is he was milking cows. By the time I met him, I actually came back to Basin Harbor a second time. He was, at that time, we had both graduated from college, and I was sort of trying to figure out, oh, what's next? And he was home with an agricultural deferment. And so he lived in the big family house on 22A. You cross 22A, you take your milk can, your metal milk can,
Mm-hmm.
and dip it into the milk tank. And that was my first experience with raw milk. And I say anybody who tells you that raw milk doesn't taste any different or isn't better than the homogenized and the pasteurized milk that you get in the store, it's not true.
That's
it's
not true.
really delicious. And, that was, again, there's something about Vermont and the work ethic at Basin Harbor. We worked hard. We played hard. And the work ethic of the dairy farmers that I met was really pretty amazing. At that time, my husband's name is John. He had off every third weekend. And so it was a job that was very, very time consuming. But I got to know a little bit about field work. I got to know a little bit about milking cows, and really just fell in love with that way of life. His mother actually was a housewife who, and I would say both of his parents did the dairy farm, but they also were really active in the community. So there was this thing where you work really hard and you also contribute to your community. They were members of the school board. My mother-in-law, Marion, was one of the women who started the counseling service. She was one of the founding members. So all of that really appealed to me, that particular way of life, that you can make an impact in a small state, you can work hard. And in the meantime, then I finished graduate school. I actually got an internship working for the Teacher Corps at UVM, and taught school at Milton, Vermont, which was a blast also, a lot of fun. I was just for some reason talking to somebody actually about mice and how I'm not too fond of mice and how they can get into your pantry and your SOS pads and everything. But I said I do have one fond memory of mice from when I was teaching school at Milton. And there was a group of seniors who I just loved. And it was April Fool's Day. And I opened my top desk drawer getting ready to do the lesson for that day. And it was a fake mouse on springs, jumped out. And I screamed, and they all applauded, and it was just a really fun thing.
That's a great story.
Yeah, so I taught in Milton, and then actually I became pregnant with my first daughter, Ella, who is now 42, and living in Switzerland. She married an Italian man, and then I got kind of bored just staying at home and thought, there's one thing I'd really, really like to do. I had an admiration at that time. I was an English teacher and I majored in English, so I have a real love of the written word, of communication in general. And I was admiring the Addison Independent. And actually, I had, when I first came to Vermont, admired the Burlington Free Press, okay? And at that time, Gordon Mills, do you remember Gordon?
I remember the name.
Okay, Gordon Mills had been the publisher, actually, the editor of the Burlington Free Press. And then he and a number of other co-workers, colleagues there, purchased the Free Press. They owned it together, and then they sold it to Gannett. So when he sold it to Gannett, he then came down to Middlebury and bought the Addison Independent, which changed things somewhat. It was still, I think there was a colonel, I'm trying to remember the colonel's name, who had the paper. And Gordon modernized it to a certain extent. He really upped the ante on it. And so I thought, well, I think I kind of like that paper. I'd maybe like to work there. And I did. I took a part-time job being an advertising representative, worked with some really great people, learned how to walk down the street and into a store and ask somebody if they'd like to buy a 2-column by 2-inch ad, which would cost them $36. And I still remember the first person that I ever sold an ad to was Pete LaFramboise. I don't know if you remember Pete.
No.
Yeah, he had Pete's Garage. Pete Sitko, I think. But before that, he was working in a tire for some...
Pete Sitko is located in the corner here, right? Or on the Circle?
Yeah.
What's now the Circle?
Yes, before that he was working, and I think it may have been his place. He's selling tires where County Tire is now, maybe. Anyway, he didn't buy the ad. He was the first person who I ever tried to sell an ad to. So,
that's great.
yeah, it was actually, again, a wonderful job. Well, shortly, I'm trying to think of how long I worked there, but I was pregnant with my second daughter, and Gordon sold the paper. And that's when he sold it to Angelo Lynn,
Right.
who came in as a young person, really gung-ho to do something with this paper. And it became even more fun. It was really terrific. I came back shortly after having my second child, and Angelo was just getting started, and he sent me to a week-long, I'm trying to think the name of it. It was in Washington, D.C., actually, just outside of there, a week-long seminar, workshops, where advertising managers from all across the United States met and discussed problems and learned new ways to do things. And so he was really very supportive about getting better at what you do, being more professional. But by that time, I was the advertising manager, and I just loved it, and I came back really energized, and we worked together to make this what I think is a really wonderful paper. I think that I kind of am very rah-rah about...
I would join you on that.
Is what?
I would join you on that.
Thank you. I mean, to me, it's really wonderful to be able to work at something that you believe in. You know, you enjoy the actual work, and the benefit, the company that benefits is a company that you really believe in. And to this day, every once in a while, I still email Angelo and say thank you, because to have a really strong community, you need a strong newspaper. And, you know, during a time, things are really pretty challenging now for newspapers, as I'm sure you're aware.
Sure.
Angelo never cut reporters. You know, you see some Gannett papers cutting reporters and bringing in more advertising people, but Angelo always kept enough people in the newsroom so that the news was out there, and which is, of course, what it's all about. Telling what's going on in local towns, telling what's going on in your communities, not just government, but culture, and well, you read it, you know, it's terrific. So I was the advertising manager at the Addison Independent for 30 years.
30 years.
30 years. And you know, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the work that I did there. I look at the paper now and I can still see little vestiges of maybe things that I did. And I love it. The commitment is clearly there that they're still doing a wonderful job delivering the news. And I'd like to put in kind of a plug for advertising as well, because advertising is actually a very, very important part of the paper. It's what allows the news to happen, and it's a news of its own kind. So I always felt as though advertising, selling advertising, was something that maybe is underrated. And people think, oh, you're just trying to shove something down my throat. You just want my money. But it's really about looking at businesses and determining what they need, who they are, and how getting the word out about what they do and why they do it and how they do it is what will help their business flourish. So I always felt it was really more of a communication kind of thing, a matching up of
It's good civics, the way you present it. You
well,
know?
thank you.
In other words, it says that there's all of this is connected to where we live and who we are, and there's a sense of community.
It is so totally 100%. Some of us were, I'm on the search committee for a pastor in our church in Virgins Congregational Church, and a bunch of us on the committee were together last night, and we were discussing with someone what made Vermont different. And the person was saying, is it really that you are, not as fast-paced as maybe in the city? That actually kind of made me laugh, because I'm a person who cranks up, and in all of my jobs, I would say I live in a very placid, peaceful, tolerant, wonderful place, but you can still crank up but one of the examples that somebody gave is that when you're in the supermarket here in Vermont and you get to the end of the aisle and you almost knock into somebody who's coming around the other aisle, that in Vermont people will say hi and they'll smile and they laugh.
And they'll laugh.
Other places that isn't necessarily so.
Right.
But small example, yes, I think community being incredibly important, the fact that you can make a difference, the fact that people care about one another here, I think is very evident in a lot of the nonprofits that are out there. Certainly the church I go to, the counseling service, Bixby Library, where I was a director for 7 years after I left the Independent, which was again something to do at age 62 to start a new career. Wonderful, fantastic opportunity to impact the community.
Was that a different kind of experience?
It was a very different kind of experience that, again, I loved. I'm not a librarian, and I was hired to go in and really specifically make some changes and get fiscal stuff together, make that happen, and get the building in order and some of the collections in order. And so, again, it was a privilege to work with some really, really wonderful people, as I had at the Addison Independent. But it involved sales maybe of a different sort, getting the community on board to support us, writing grants, starting programs, and it was working for a nonprofit as opposed to working for a business that was a profit-making business. So very different, very wonderful.
My first experience at Bixby was when they had a demonstration on cooking chicken.
When was that?
That was in, would have been 2000.
Oh my gosh! And where? At the library?
At the library.
How did they
when
cook?
When you come in the door,
Okay.
you turn over to the desk is over to the right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You go to the left. You go to that section in there.
Yeah.
The chef was a son of someone who was connected, I think, to the Bixby, and he was a chef at Middlebury College, and we thought. I've always been a library person, and I thought, I've never gone for chicken at a library before. And it was just great. And then that beautiful rotunda. Is that the right word?
The dome is,
the dome
is just amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah. The building itself, actually, well, first I should ask you, how was the chicken?
Oh, chicken was great. He did 4 recipes, and you could sample all 4.
And have you tried those recipes since?
Long time ago, but they're lost. They're probably lost in my massive collection.
of
cookbooks.
You go through those, and then you go, "Wow, I haven't tried that in about 10 years."
That's right.
Come on, dig that out.
So that was a great place to work then.
It was a great place to work, and the building alone, being able to head into work and be inside of that beautiful building, which, by the way, was named by Preservation Trust of Vermont as one of the top 10 architectural buildings in Vermont. So there was quite a bit of responsibility to take care of that building, and it's one of the things I'm proud of is we were able to secure enough grants to do some real infrastructure repair.
It's a piece of unusual architecture in a town that has unusual architecture.
It's interesting that you say that. What other interesting architecture are you talking about?
The whole street complex on the other side, with the walkways up and the walkways down and the stores all across. And that's just incredible,
Yeah, Vergennes is an up-and-coming place, and part of it is the preservation, the designation as a village center, and because of that, being able to use tax credits to make some of the
Sure.
repairs and make it look quite as attractive as it does.
And there was another place that you worked too, right?
I think not. I've worked
Oh.
for no. I went directly from the Addison Independent to Bixby Library, and then now I can sleep late in the morning if
You're
I
retired.
want. I do not choose to do that. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But no, that's
And now you're a member of the Counseling Service Board.
I am.
And both of us are on
Yes.
that board. So you want to say something about that?
I have to say that Kittyhawks Home, I don't know, of course you know Kitty because she's on the
Sure.
board. Kitty has been a person in my life who's kind of gotten me into all kinds of things, and she's the person who got me onto the Counseling Service Board. It's a real uphill learning curve. There is so much about that place that's really amazing. I don't think I knew quite all about what it did or what it does and what it hopes to do. I feel very excited by it. I feel actually very excited by Rachel Cummings, who is the director, and she's been there now for almost a year, and how she seems to have a real, has her finger on the heartbeat of what's going on and what the needs are for the vulnerable population in our area that we serve, which is Addison County. It's Counseling Service of Addison County. So it's great to be on the board, to be learning and feeling as though I might even be able to help out. I was able to help out with a grant that she was writing, which was fun. And yeah, it's a great group of people. Also, I think, yourself included, get to meet all of these new people who I didn't know before,
Right.
Louise and
Sure.
Barbara.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm glad to be participating in that. Yeah.
So you've had a very interesting life because you came looking for a job and you got a job,
Yeah.
and the job, it was instant falling in love, right?
It was.
With
You're such a
Vermont?
good listener.
Yeah.
Yes, it
and-
was an instant falling in love with the environment, but not just the environment, not just the physical environment, which was absolutely gorgeous, but
Yeah,
the way of life here. The people are pretty special in this state.
they are. And,
Yeah.
and the stories are, are remarkable and so down home, and at the same time very very perceptive in
Well, thank
the
you.
things that make us laugh and the things that make about being a special place in your life, and that's a great thing to be able to celebrate.
It is, and actually, I appreciate your asking and giving me the opportunity to celebrate it.
Well, we thank you because our affirmation in these conversations is that the story matters. Our story matters. Your story matters. Everyone's story matters. And we just need to provide ways to hear them. And thank you for sharing your story today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Good. We would like to hear your story as well. So thank you for being part of our conversation, and know that your story matters.